Ready for a serious workout? I missed you yesterday in your modalities of non-presence, but today is when we get to talk about different types of addictive being. And today we host Larry Rickels' seminar with great pleasure and delight. Those of you who haven't yet had the experience of working with Larry probably know some of his work, and that he is a cult figure, so we're going to try to pry him for some information and some interpretive highs, and continue our own experience of hermeneutic frustration. That is what we're jamming on. Can you fix this?
Can you make it closer to...
Closer?
Yeah.
That seems, okay. Interesting. All right. I was trying to shoo it away. It's not too weird.
It's feedback, you know.
Feedback.
It's almost, yeah. Can I rotate that?
It was my fault.
Maybe you need stereo.
No, it's probably the opposite.
Is it this approximately here that's doing it?
Yeah, actually, that one is higher. Maybe the angle I had.
Well, in any case, I think now it's okay. It's okay. Thank you. So we've been following in this class the itineraries of the gift, what a gift is in Derrida's work, and how it busts all economies. If something is a gift, then it partakes of the velocities of the event, which is to say, you can't necessarily tie it down to any calculable or cognitive appropriation or system of appropriation. Let me give a brief example. If someone gives you a gift for your birthday, and then let's say you forget to give them a gift back, and they say, hey, I gave you a gift for your birthday. What's up with that? If there's an obligation or an economy of giving and taking, it's not a gift, because then it gets drawn back into an economy of give and take, and something that can be measured, can have the qualities and dimensions and expectations of an obligation or something that you owe back. If there's owing, if there's any measure at all, then it's not a gift. Which might mean that the gift is completely, it surpasses every initiative, even to give or to take. We have studied that here in terms of forgiveness. We have been looking at the don in the pardon, in the impossibility of offering a gift, giving a gift, taking a gift, knowing a gift, recognizing a gift, identifying a gift. A gift might arrive years later. It might arrive in your unconscious, in a dream sequence that can or can't be articulated or secondarily revised. The gift today, here this is contradictory because one can't point to a gift, is the presence and the advisory board that Lawrence Rickels and his students offer us. So, welcome. I won't go into what we've been discussing in terms of hospitality. This might already be an error that I think I'm in a position to welcome you, because according to Kantian structures of cosmopolitan opening toward the other, isn't it the case that in order to offer hospitality, one has to have property? Like, can I actually even invite you or welcome you to a place or space that is not mine, that is not owned by me? Am I in my right mind, in my right place? who am I to say welcome to this structure, you see? So everything we're doing is going to be thrown into rigorous questioning and be scrutinized, and we can't take anything for granted, even though granting is a modality of the gift. So let us remember that we are here, that we find ourselves in this queer place of vacation, work, space, in the sublime regions of the Alps that threaten to crush our balls, should we have such, or our non-existent balls, or our metaphysical balls. I'll get off the balls right away. I don't know how they got it here. Follow the bouncing balls. I was thinking of something. You see, he's already invading me. I'm thinking his text is scrolling out, and in an obsessional neurotic way, it's interfering with my ability to speak, because it's like a permanent Tourette's syndrome to have Larry this close. I'm reading him and remembering the bouncing balls. Okay, forget it. So we've been following the itineraries of the gift, remembering that in Derrida, he points out to the double valence of the gift, which in German, do you know what gift or giftish is in German?
Poison.
Poison. So there's always the possibility that the gift is a gift that is giftish. So poisonous. It's always both and. And now that we've arrived at the polluted precincts of poison and poisoning, we're trying to move into a certain reflection on toxicity, that which pollutes, that which poisons, and that which we ingest, introject, incorporate, internalize, shoot up. That might be fiction. We shoot up a lot of fictions. We are very often in a state of trance, with or without the chemical prosthesis. You know, when you write, or when you perform, or when you do your artwork, or when you are in a certain moment in your editing room, does this ever happen to you that you're in the zone? You know? So the question is, one of the many questions is there such a thing as a drug-free zone? Or are we, in order to be culturally stimulated and productive, always seeking out more or less artificial, non-artificial ways of getting high? Here we are high in the mountains, working together. As Ernst Jünger, who wrote on drugs, and who, by the way, is rumored in Freiburg to have turned on Heidegger to LSD, to acid. They apparently went acid tripping together. Ernst Jünger reminds us, and so do psychoanalysts, that anything can serve as a drug. Oxygen, okay, so we have no oxygen here. Whatever. Oxygen, what else? Things that are not necessarily scheduled as drugs by the FBI. Let me remind you that before Larry and I started working on addicted being and cultural zoning ordinances of certain kinds of artificial states of mind or mind-altering experiences. I don't know where that sentence was going, because now he's scrolling up again. I'm thinking of his work on California, on what California is constitutively addicted to in order to present itself as a kind of state of exception in the United States that has injected itself with philosophemes of Germanicity. Larry wrote and scandalized everyone a very important book called The Case of California, which he says is ruled by and rocked by 3 Austrians. Do you remember them? Does anyone, do you want to guess who the 3 Austrian principal signifiers would be that actually live stream California as we speak? Don't forget, California is the space of transplant, translation, where Europe went, where all the great, well, Thomas Mann, Adorno, give me names.
Schwarzenegger.
That's one of the Austrian. Yeah, very good. The whole cult of bodybuilding and Bildung that Larry tracks and traces relentlessly. And this was before Schwarzenegger, but this was Larry's prediction and prophecy, became the governor of California. So Larry already had him in a governing, posited him as a governing force. Who are the others who transplanted to California? Schoenberg. They you know, all of Hollywood music is Dash Marcuse, absolutely. Whose TA was Angela Davis. All sorts of combo platters and incomprehensible hybridity occurred to create a cultural space that was largely repressed and went underground and into some sort of subterranean logic that Larry excavated with his genealogical probes take place in California, which is a place of constant transplant. Even as France, when her wine production got depleted, started transplanting raisins and grapes to California in order to make them French. You see, there's a constant movement of grafting, which is very important in Derrida's work, so that it's not a question of some purported or fake origin, but the grafting that you need to somehow be able to monitor, tag, identify, follow, bless you, and read. What kind of grafting is taking place? What kind of artificial insets or installations that create something that flies under the philosophical radar and comes up as California. California being usually not only the last to wake up in America, but the trendsetter in so many ways that aren't even accounted for. So if we had time, we would try to understand what it meant for Larry to have the breakthrough idea and to follow it through of using a state. We could use Switzerland here if we want to jam later. A state as an inexhaustible text that called out for hermeneutic activity and did so with urgency, because there was a whole Nazi transplant to the youth culture of California as well, a denied, disavowed Nazi transplant, so that the other Austrian name would be that of, you're right, I can never hear that name. Sorry, I'm like, who, what? Trauma zone, you know, so you're right, that one. So, and then finally, to make it the most improbable rendezvous of forces and velocities that are driven by signifiers that actually imprint us, even if we relate to them in disavowal and denial, would be, what's the other Austrian from there? Freud. So these would be the forces that that Larry Rickels has constellated and summoned to reappear in the mapping that he offered of something called California, which becomes ever more a text that needs to be read, especially if you're finding yourself in the turbulent areas of American politics and cultural dissent in a certain way. Do you want to say anything about that, or should I then bring it back to Gautam?
Do bring it back, but I'll just say briefly that when I wrote The Case of California, it appeared in '91. I haven't read Philip K. Dick yet, and now our seminar has been, we've all been returning to Philip K. Dick, who was really the poster boy of my thought experiment back then. Because in the simulacra, to get back to the conflict Avital was conjuring, we have the problem of integrating Germany within the post-war world, simply situated in a post-war state of cohabitation. California, which is then America, and Germany are one state, in which Dick underscores, brings to the fore, and raises to consciousness a process of integration involving truly uncanny parties and opposites, perhaps, a place of experimentation towards an ultimate integration, which, however, is not just a projected integration, but we have been in a state of integrating the consequences of World War II all the time. I mean, sometimes in the States one gets the sense that we can now, for the first time, convene and decide what to think about Germany. But we have, in fact, been living with the whole inheritance of psychopathic violence for a very long time. And this unbearable experiment, hard to think about experiment, for some reason found a location in California, largely, to my mind, through Adorno's ambivalence, who launched a diagnosis that is, however, interestingly hard to trace back to him decisively. But he suggested that National Socialism was psychoanalysis in reverse, and then he also said the Californian culture industry is psychoanalysis in reverse. And it's this reversal of psychoanalysis that interested me in that project way back then. And it seemed the reversal was being metabolized within adolescence or group and adolescent psychology. That's where the experiment was ultimately being waged, conducted, and explored.
So Larry has taught us how to look for and read foreign bodies, as well as the troubled effort to integrate certain alterities. I will get back to that term, which was news yesterday. Foreign bodies are very important, as I suggested before, for French theory, for philosophy, contemporary philosophy. Do you know why it would be important, this concept or para-concept of the foreign body? Do you know what it means, a foreign body? I think it's very important for us to try to integrate, which is an ironic thing to say, because the foreign body is that which can't be integrated. A foreign body, a corps étranger or a Fremdkörper, so it's foreign, could be illegal, alien stuff, foreign, or other foreignness. It can't be, it can neither be expelled, you can't throw it up or get rid of it or eliminate it, nor can it be integrated and become part of a larger body. It just sits there as a part of a structure of parasitical inclusion. I will give a catachrestic and a poor example to explain why a foreign body is very, very important. and why Larry and also, of course, Derrida try to find the location shots of the foreign body. When I couldn't get a job, I remember appealing to one of the great godfathers of philosophical, theoretical, continental work, Paul de Man. And he said to me, you should go to California, to any of the stations in the University of California. So, of course, I did land in the worst shithole, Riverside. No, okay. Which I love. I forgot I was being filmed. To which I owe the greatest debt of gratitude. Okay, fine. So, quote me. Paul de Man said, if you go to California and you get in on any of the, and then I was thrown up into Berkeley somehow, but if you go to any of the stations of their system, you will be able to parasitically sit on them and they'll never expel you, which is kind of what happened. He was right. He was very astucieux. So that I had the privilege of conducting my own private guerrilla warfare as a foreign body, which is to say, something that is neither included and welcomed, no great hospitality, mi casa, su casa, none of that shit, but okay, you're in, but you're not in, but we're not going to throw you out. So that's what the foreign body offers, and you can imagine what kind of maneuvering and strategic thought goes around the foreign body, which is neither a mark of full exclusion or expulsion, it can't be expelled or thrown up or gotten rid of, nor of inclusion, absolute inclusion. Yes, go
ahead. Is it possible, though, that the foreign body as parasite is the integrated foreign body? I mean, the foreign body gets projected and integrated as parasite. And the foreign body in the first place is the embodiment, for example, of a contradiction or a conflict. Freud's first definition of conversion hysteria spoke of the transfer of a conflict to its somatic representation, whereby to get rid of it, but that at the same time a mnemic symptom or symbol had to be installed in consciousness at the same time, which he calls verbatim like a parasite. So it seems to me that that is a first stage or phase of a certain attempted integration of the foreign body. Its treatment as parasitical.
Okay, we're beginning to generate a vocabulary here of the parasitical, the foreign body. This is also a parallel catalog of qualities that will be ascribable to drugs. We can't integrate, though Larry just qualified what integration is and where it comes from in Freud. There's all sorts of, by the way, parasitical relations. It's not only a predatory invasion. Some parasites get along very well with the host body. This is, by the way, the irony of hospitality for us to be talking about parasites, you parasites who showed up today. Sorry. Whoops, Tourette's syndrome. Because there are so-called commensual parasites, which means they sit at the same table. They're friends. They're parasites. There are hosts that say, I need a few parasites, actually. I'd like to host them. Nietzsche says that when you're gracious enough and generous enough and big enough, you welcome the parasites. You say, sure, come in. I'm already beginning to, and always already, thinking about California, the difficult relation, the mendacious relation or fallacious relation sometimes to the so-called foreign, because California is also the place of a very important inscription of Latin America, right? And Mexican signifiers and others as well. So the relation to the so-called foreign, which by the way was of course the origin of California, is something very deep and troubled and continues to be generated out of the structures that Larry identified with certain levels of innate racism and expulsions practiced by the Germanified or secretly German transplant of attitudes, even if they were somehow carried by those who were victims of racist behaviors and grammars. Just because you're a victim of racism doesn't mean that you didn't take the hit and it didn't contaminate you. Yes?
I was wondering if you could say something about movement in parasitism, because I think of a tick as being a very static thing, but when you're talking about Riverside, Berkeley, etc., I'm presuming you're on the move, literally, or moving through the system. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that relation of parasitism when it's in motion.
That's very a fine question, because you're right that one usually looks at it as a stagnation, a vampiric sucking out of all sorts of energies. There's all sorts of parasitical, let's say, fears and dreads also in horror films, right? The invasion of parasitical structures or entities, the predatory parasite, or even, and this is something that I tried to start thinking about in a recent book called Loser Sons, that actually will focus on eventually the disappearance of authority, which I'm doing a drive-by and I apologize. But even for Kafka and Freud and Hegel already, the child arrives as a predatory parasite. Certainly for ego. When ego has to yield way to the arrival of the child, ego has to grow up fast so that the child can have a place. And it's almost as though, according to many phantasms, according to many things that are actually repressed, as we started to discuss the other day, the untold story of infanticide, for example, many cannot put up with the arrival of the child parasite and have not put up with it. Also because the child parasite, as such, is considered innately parasital, not parasital, or from Paris, but a child arrives in order to overtake the parent, to become what the parent now has to relinquish. So ego has a hard time renouncing its great place of sovereignty and all that, and giving up. We have, ordinary language that says you have to sacrifice. All this means ego has to give up. So the relation to the parasite also can almost dialectically swerve or turn around to divinize the child as part of a repressive mechanism, instead of saying, here comes the parasite, we're dead meat. You have mythologies, mythemes, and religions based on a holy child. Almost as if, let's compensate royally for this dread of the monstrosity that we have created that will overtake us, that in our neighborhood here was amply thematized in the work by Mary Shelley called Frankenstein, who is also a model and grid and terminal, a techno-monster, viewed as child, right? He has a maker, a creator, bless you, also as that which never had a childhood, that arrives as the sheer monstrosity of that which you have made, your child. So this is not to say that that's what children are, though for some of us they are, but to show that there's a whole logic of parasitism that is always close by. It's in the body, it's in the home, it's a parasite is very up close and personal, if not inside already, right? So it's not a long distance kind of relationship. And this is why also it has to be expelled in terms of projective phantasms and divinized and made so sacred that it's actually the good side of a horror that's also inscribed in experience. Yes?
Yeah, I just want to, because everything that you've been saying about the Germanic influence, no, you were thinking about the Germanic influence and everything. I mean, it sounds as though even before that, it's endemic to the place. This kind of, because I was recalling the first explorers, the Spanish explorers, Cabeza de Vaca, and those that went there, and they found themselves in a place that actually didn't articulate this kind of foreignness. Yes, you're from here, but not, and yes, the
right.
tribes that were living there.
Exactly.
They were always in that kind of state of transitory state of we're nomads, but we're kind of here, and I don't know, this whole kind of expulsion of the other always.
This is. But what's also important, not that I'm pointing at you, but in Mexico there's a German subconscious as well, and even
really?
yeah, no kidding. Like even with the uber popular Frida K, right? That everyone knows and wears on the handbags and all that. There's right. That's a German. That's a German signifier as well. Flusser, all sorts of people who made their home Mexico, and I'm not prepared to expand the California territory back to its origins in Mexico, but I'm saying that what Larry was saying also in some ways more complicated perhaps, traveled across the border into Mexico, and the German sites of even indigenous Mexico sometimes have a German accent. That's all I want to say. That could still be explored. But you're absolutely right to consider the fate of the foreign bodies that are perpetually expelled, even if they're actually indigenous. The notion of foreign, all I want to say here, is very unstable. And and with the parasite, I wanted to say it's so close, up personal, close, in the skin, under the skin, that it might be the most intimate relationship you have. Even though the parasitical is something that you want to imagine very far out and away.
I was just wondering is it correct to define a foreign body just a parasite? I mean, parasite
right.
for me as a negative approach. Isn't it more a little bit like what do you call it? I just lost the word. When two organs are living together, symbiosis. Yeah, isn't it more a symbiosis?
Let me add to that, because that was exactly
yeah,
my...
we really need your help. No, go ahead. Come on.
No, because what I was going to ask is kind of similar, so I'm just going to add to it, which is this...
Parasite.
Which is this... I don't know how far it's fair to deviate on this concept, because it's obviously...
Deviancy will not be tolerated. Now, go ahead.
Because my question is, I mean, the very concept of parasite is kind of complicated because, so many species of animals, for example, now are no longer sustainable without human presence, and we are kind of parasites as well. So to me, parasite seems like an area in a gradient more than a specific definition.
That's perfect, with the exception of the to me. No, you're right. You're right. It's not only a subjective contingency or a to me issue. And this is what Larry and I want to emphasize, which is the complexity. And I'm glad you offer correctives, and also you consider the mobility, the reversals, the inversions of the parasitical. And you're absolutely right that this is, as everything that we've been working with heretofore, a highly ambivalent concept. So I said, remember, parasitical inclusion. I didn't want to necessarily substantialize the parasite, but the mode of including the type, the specific type of hospitality you offer an other, which may or may not be monstrous or aberrant or deviant. But we didn't even talk about it, but I started to say there's commensalism, which is two parasites that sit at the same table, or a host that welcomes and issues an invitation to a parasitical entity who needs the parasite to release certain things, and so on and so forth. Don't forget, we're now moving into the discussion of drugs, of the chemical prosthesis, of the foreign body that is injected and that one lives with. Some of the paradoxes of of being on drugs, as she calls them in this book, is that, well, I forgot when you said that.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Wait, paradoxes. Oh, of being on drugs is that the body comes equipped with receptors for certain drugs. That's, for her, the one who wrote this, who started out in some ways with the telephone book and creating a switchboard. That means that there's a call put out to certain drugs because the question of integration has already been regulated, all sorts of ordinances have been stamped, and visas have been issued, so that drugs, they can't enter these bodily and corporeal precincts if there weren't a waiting cheerleader party already enticing and welcoming there. If you didn't have receptors for drugs, you would just convulse and get sick and so on and so forth, which you do anyway if you OD and so on, or do a wrong mixture. So there are all sorts of paradoxes, and let me now suggest, but did you want to say something?
Yeah, because what occurred to me when you were talking about the host, you know, is that maybe even not even the history of, so the desire to be spent and sucked up by something is also a kind of parasitism.
Well, no, that's very brilliant, if
So,
I got it right. Now you're going to ruin it, but go ahead.
No, what I mean is that, like, how much are we all parasites of each other? So, like, you know, I graduated as a psychologist, so it occurs to me that a person that is like, constantly, almost pathologically, like letting people, be parasites, right? Letting people suck something out of them is also living a kind of parasitical existence, depending on the others.
No, this is very, very. This is a nice moment. Because you're absolutely right in shifting a certain axis that we appear to establish, and we wanted immediately to destabilize, which you've just achieved. Let me give you an example which might not be a catachrestic, problematic, and bad one, which is Goethe, in his conversation with Eckermann. There's a moment where Eckermann issues a warning. Eckermann was his companion, his disciple, his secretary, his ass kisser, anything Goethe wanted, Eckermann was and did. And there's a moment where Eckermann, on one of their walks, issues a warning and says, you know, you're a celebrity. You have the biggest star power around, so people are going to devour you and you're going to have problems with that. And Goethe responds, and this is very typical of Goethe, who, by the way, has a direct line to psychoanalysis and Freud. Freud really pumps out Goethe's work to establish some of his most outrageous and fabulous discoveries, the unconscious of the superego. Freud has a very ambivalent relation to Goethe, who inseminated him through the ear and up the ass and in all sorts of ways that I unfortunately can't get into right now unless you beg me. But anyway, so Goethe, in his typical outrageous and brilliant way, responded, what about those who want to be devoured, who welcome the parasites and need to be vampirized and want to be internalized, introjected by the other, and want to make their chief residency in the other? What about that? So he established a desire to be parasited and devoured, and maybe that's too simplistic so far, but Goethe had a way to libidinize even the shittiest situations. For example, he says, the mark of a genius isn't if you do great things and you have fabulous opportunities and you shine and you rise and a star is born, etc., Hallmark card isn't. But it's when you can make something out of your utterly banal, ordinary, and shitty lives. That's the genius who does it. So he, in a sense, was always capable of pumping libidinal energy into depleted and desolate spaces, even to the extent of saying, I welcome being devoured. That is my wish. And then he gave an example, which was that of the legendary pelican, who asks and opens itself up to be devoured by its young. So that there are animals, it's not a freak of nature to want to be devoured. This kind of desire for devoration, it's even, guess what, hello, Christian, eat my body.
According to Klein, every infant sees that as the transaction with the mother. The mother is Lebensmittel, she's the nourishment itself.
Right.
It's the beginning of unconscious life.
It's the beginning, the mom who is the one-stop shopping, who is the grocery store, whose body is that kind of signpost for devour me. So that's how we start off with devoration. But the wish to become the one who is devoured is something that Goethe kind of installed. Yes, please.
But isn't that the case with all relationships, that we feed off of each other? And in order to maintain our sanity, we need that feedback from other human beings.
Feedback is good. We started in our class to discuss nurturance, feeding, what you metabolize, what you can't digest, how we digest ideas. And so it may or may not be part of every relationship, but it is certainly mostly disavowed because there's something that can't be chewed through or digested in. But absolutely, and what Larry and I hope to give you today, to stay with the vocabulary of Melanie Klein, is a good feed. So that for Melanie Klein, everything is a matter of being the derivative relation to the good breast, which, remember, we discussed as initially being a persecutory invasion of the mouth, of the being of the child. The child has to do some work to accept the breast. And then the silly example, really unfortunate, but it will help us get over this quickly, would be like that breast that travels down the road in Woody Allen, you know, that huge thing that scares the shit out of the infant because it's coming at him, and it's not experienced initially as filling the mouth, but as an invasive tankage of sorts that has to be dealt with and has to be transvalued. The kid has to do a lot of work to love the mother, by the way. It's not the first relationship. This is something that comes at you, threatens to suffocate, and so on and so forth. So I think we've established a dossier of ambivalences that we want to consider as we proceed. Any other interventions, Clara?
If you need liberation, so if you need to be parasites, aren't you becoming parasites yourself to the parasites?
Yes, there's something. Let's add on to the Deleuzian vocabulary. You know, Deleuze says that every experience of writing throws you and plunges you into becoming woman. Okay. Meaning, oh, you think it's funny, girls? All these girls laughing here? No, I'm kidding. Becoming woman because of the extreme, I'm not saying it's my everyday experience, I'm not even saying I'm a woman, so don't start with me, but just to regress for a moment because of the extreme limits of purported compliance, negotiation with submission, and so on and so forth. Kind of French and old-fashioned, but let's just buy it momentarily. You can always send it back to the manufacturer. There may be, but nonetheless, Deleuze has these structures that I think you're familiar with, right? Of becoming woman, becoming other, and one might now want to include the possible philosophy of becoming parasite. In fact, there's the way we've depleted the earth and the planet shows that we have not been custodians worthy of the gift and granting, but that there has been a kind of predatory, parasitical violence enacted upon the other, the earth, and so on and so forth. So this is something that Melanie Klein also insists on, that we're polluting machines, right? We are offered a good breast and a good feed, but we shit on it, or we spit on it, or we bite it. So this is something that she takes very seriously, that there are these acts of repugnance and repudiation, also of that which may or may not, I mean, it doesn't have a value. Someone sticking their breast in you may not be the best thing to have when you're 1 hour old. You know? You go, hey, give me a break, give me some slack here. What is this, going to suffocate me?
I'm thinking of devouring as the burn victim, and the maggots cleaning, as a cleaning process. And well, I think you have to see that one thing is eating off the other there, that it's not a mutual devouring, that one thing is going through some process of changing, whether the change is feeding or feeding, or it's still something that is, you know, it's sort of, well, feeding, it's a kind of a gift. In the case of the feeding of the child, the gift, the parasite is taking a gift, and in the case of so it's the same case.
No, we would want to, very nice, if we had years together, we would want to see if once you recognize or identify something as a gift, is it still a gift? Though you're right that if there were such a thing that could be given and pre-given as a gift, feeding in that original primal way might fit the description. And we would want to track it through all the ambivalence that you very smartly inscribed in your remark. So, yes, Kat.
Would you say that perhaps perhaps one of the first relationships a child has in the unconscious is that in the womb and with the mother's body in a more intimate way, in a way that's possibly even psychically connected to
That is absolutely irrefutable, I think, yes. But the question is whether the maternal, and by the way, I think you were talking about Schreber, who had maternal urges, the maternal carrier might relate to this as a parasite as well. And I don't know how that gets transmitted, if it gets transmitted. Something is growing in me. Is the experience, an alterity, an other. I'm doubly kind of designated, at least doubly, if you don't consider the split self and so on. So I'm carrying something, and therefore all of these alien-like movies and so on, our whole culture of signifiers that show what might come out of the maternal womb, which has been so idealized and domesticated. But also the surprise attack of what does come out, you know, in some that are thematized in some of our narratives. Oh, your child is African American. How did that happen? Oh, this, oh that. You know, the surprise of what happens, or even the absolute trauma of birth, which has, wow, I wonder why, has not been treated much by philosophy. Nelson has his important book, Birth to Presence, of course. But, and Alyssa Marder recently published a book on the trauma of birth, which is something that we all purportedly, except me, I am not of woman born, by the way, we all purportedly and ostensibly have experienced, not experienced, the inoccurrence of birth. A trauma that cannot be narrated because we weren't present to something that happened to us prior to happening being something that can be recounted and told. So she tries to read this in Heideggerian and psychoanalytic terms, what it means, the sheer fact that we were purportedly born. Yes?
I wanted to, maybe this is throwing the doors open too wide, but I wanted to...
Maybe this is what?
Throwing the doors open a bit too wide, but I wanted...
I thought I was training you. Start again. No.
That's far.
As far as I understand.
Oh, I'm also your trainer, your horse whisperer, your animal trainer, and he. Now I don't want to put you too much under pressure. He has exquisite insight, but he subverts it and undermines it by saying, I'm supposing that what I'm about to say, which is probably wrong, and anyway, what do I know? And I'm probably opening the door too wide, and it probably is absolutely irrelevant. And anyway, even if you understood what it was about, it probably would not help anything for anyone. So I'm trying to train him a little.
That's exactly what I was going to say. What I was going to say was we've got this interesting kind of merry-go-round of parasitism where the parasite flips into the host and the host flips into the parasite, and there's this nice complication. But I wanted to think about these women who occasionally pop out of Austrian people's basements to the world media's kind of great interest, and the relationship of host and parasite in that quite terrible circumstance, because obviously these men who capture these they're young girls and parasitize on them, absolutely use them. But then I think what's been interesting and absolutely tragic afterwards is the way these girls seem to fall in love with the hosts, the Stockholm syndrome. So there's this the other example I was thinking of, which is closer to my usual registers, in Liverpool, in the middle of the 19th century, the life expectancy for most people was about, I mean, depending on what industry you're in, but it was 18, 20, something like that. And the life expectancy for another certain set, who will remain nameless, was something like 60, 70 years. So for every lifetime of these captains of industry, there were sort of 3, 4 generations of people grist through the mill in order for these, I think, parasites to continue their existences. But yet today, maybe in most places things aren't that extreme, but yet we still have this Stockholm syndrome of what parasitizes us. We seem to fall in love with it quite easily.
I think that's a very rich intervention, which now gets grafted onto and metonymizes into a question of social justice and political structuring of the so-called subject, which is to say the dependency on the abusive other, the becoming parasite, as Clara was saying, even of the one who is being parasited. So it's another twist in the logic of ambivalent parasitism, and I welcome it. And of course, vampirizing the working class, the woman's body, the sex worker, and so on and so forth, is part of our purview and concern, and the way we want to philosophize with a hammer by beginning to jam on something that seems containable, controllable, something that we think we understand, and then watch it blow up and also take other forms. And now we're together discovering and creating a philosophical and political philosophical problem set, which is outstanding that we're doing this work together. Yes, and
Yeah,
we go
I just wanted
to
to
YY
expand.
and then to Oscar and then to you. What's your name?
Colin.
Okay.
I just wanted to expand to that, what you were saying, but like, when the parasitical relationship is established, what happens after that? Is it an idomism to attempt to balance, or is it inevitable that we consume each other to death, right, to total destruction? Because it feels like currently we're discussing all the situations that just goes and then it explodes, and then everything is destroyed, and then maybe there's a change, maybe there isn't. But is there another way we can go about trying to deal with this parasitical relationship that doesn't involve the Stockholm syndrome or something like that?
And why do you want that? Remember, in our classes, we're asking that you read yourselves reading, so that there's a meta and mega reflection on why would have asked, why this very question. Do you want a clean parasitism?
No, I'm just seeing if there's any other possibilities, that's not explored currently.
What do you have in mind?
Whether, like, this idea of balance, of kind of the yin and yang, the black and white, the balance that goes around, and whether that is being totally idealistic, or that's actually possible.
Okay, so she inscribed her own name, yin yang, right, in the question, and is calling for balance in something that, frankly, is incalculable, because we're trying to move toward a theory of dependency that is neither clean nor only to be seen in terms of toxicity and negativity. So we're really in a place where that wrap-up or balance may not obtain. However, as I tried to say, and there were very good remarks being made, certain types of parasitism are constitutive, are crucial. There is, let's start with this hypothesis, there's no social body that isn't a parasitical entity, or doesn't prey on or predate on the other. So we'll go. There's wonderful hands up.
Yeah, as far as I can understand, my thing is like sacrifice can be seen as a, for example, sustaining a parasitical situation without Stockholm syndrome. Like you give the sacrifice and then you are not in love with that, you are off the hook. Or I don't know.
Give us more.
Or
chew on.
For example, like can sacrifice be giving meaning to a totally mechanical interaction? We create this thing called sacrifice and give meaning to it, but it's just, totally mechanical, natural, like parasitical relationship is going on, but we are meaning giving animals in a sense.
So are you thinking of Bataille, or where is this coming from?
I don't know. I know sacrifice is a big topic, but I never read.
Okay.
So I don't know.
So why is it a big topic right now with you?
I gave a sacrifice maybe to come here.
You're feeling parasited. Okay.
Yeah,
Institution.
And when I noticed that, it's not. I didn't cut a sheep. I sold my drums basically.
Oh, but maybe you should have sacrificed the lamb.
No, I got 2 drum sets, so it's okay.
Okay.
But I was able to find I didn't have to sell my drums. If I wanted to, but then I had this urge to sell it, like to give something away to. So that's the point where I got interested in this sacrifice.
All
but
right.
didn't have time to read sacrifice literature.
Okay, so we will look at your anaconomical, sacrificial, parasitical relation to EGS momentarily. Okay, I'm taking yes, please.
It seemed to me that what you were calling sacrifice follows the line of a certain reading of sacrifice as being at least in proximity to an inoculation, as it were, when you give a part of something so that you're not consumed unto destruction. And sacrifice is often a partial loss, whereby you buy time so as not to be utterly devastated by the situation of, where you risk annihilation.
So you did a good thing.
I said
now you're immune.
By the way, immunity was a philosophically very controversial structure and Kant was against the vaccine. The idea that you would inject a body, and we're trying to get back to drugs, with the very poison that was to save you, Kant said didn't belong to a philosophical structure he could recognize, and therefore he was against it. The guy who invented the vaccine, again in our neighborhood here, his name was Jenner, he practiced it on cows, first of all. And it required a conversion in the very structuring of hyper-paradoxical conceptuality, because the very idea was inassimilable to 18th century philosophers. So there were big controversies and social gatherings where those who were against the idea of immunizing a body with a poison would fight with those who said we have to try it. So this is not a dialectic, this is not this, it's not that. It created a very specific logic of the autoimmunitary lab that I try to work with, Derrida works with. So you're immunizing yourself against absolute annihilation by offering an experience to yourself of partial loss. And you even said, I'm not even sure it was a loss, it felt good, you suggested.
Yeah.
So you were cutting a deal, kind of, so you wouldn't have loss. That was interesting. Yes.
Looking at it from a political perspective, the idea of immigration, for example, in the United States, and immigration laws passing. I look at it as immigrants from the point of view of the right-wing conservative as some kind of same kind of relationship. They're not supposed to be here, but we need them. So,
Mhm.
do you see where I'm going with that?
I think I do, and that's why we're going with it here. I want to say that if we started working on addiction, and I wrote the book Crack Wars, it came at a time when ethnocide was being waged without any complaint. And that happened when crack came on the scene, and you could suddenly see popular imaging of police on a black body, mostly, or on a body of color, pounding it, pummeling it, without any worry that this was a new racism. So my wish when I started to write on drugs was to show what kind of projections and political warpings and distortions were taking place when a certain kind of drug, crack, was associated with a certain kind of community, which now became, again, a target zone because of crack. Because of crack, all sorts, and now drugs in Mexico and so on. So I started thinking about the politics of tagging certain peoples with certain drugs.